Hi.
Hi, Carlisia.
Hi, Jerry.
Give us 2 minutes and we'll get started.
Sure. I remember I asked you to introduce me, but I actually worked out my introduction in a presentation, so.
Perfect.
Okay.
I'll just hand it. It's not a problem. I have one here, but not a big deal. You introduce yourself and then we'll take it from there.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just manage the Q&A.
I added a poll in there.
Okay, cool. I'll be happy to read the results of that poll. Let me get into your session. I can already see people are answering the poll.
Yeah, I added it on Saturday, I think.
Nice.
Can you hear the birds? No, good.
No. Wait. No.
Okay, good.
I'm sure the recording will hate this, but my nephew is texting me. He graduated from college today, so.
Wow, sweet.
Yes, and on Zoom. So you can do anything on Zoom now.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Okay, I think it's a good time. It's 2:30, according to everything I'm looking at. Why don't we get started?
Let's do it.
You can go ahead.
Oh, me?
Oh, yeah. You said you want to do your introduction.
So it's ready to go? Okay. Hello, everyone. I am Carlisia Thompson. I'm very glad to be here today. The talk that I'm going to present is named Open Source as a Means of Fail-Proofing Your Career. The idea here is that open source can accelerate and make your career more resilient. And resiliency is the theme of the conference this year. Let's look at this quote here. When you're working towards a promotion, aim to consistently perform at that next level. This is a quote from Gurjali Oras. He's known as the pragmatic engineer, but this is something that you hear all the time everywhere, especially in bigger companies. If you want to take the next step, wherever you're at, you have to already be performing at the next level. So this is not an original or unknown secret idea. Now, you can say, well, that's okay, but I'm not looking to get a promotion. I'm good where I am. Some places sort of push you through towards some level at which then you can say you don't want to pursue a promotion, but they will sort of make it known that you have to at least get to that level. And but even if you don't have that case, or if you are already at that level, you can say, oh, I don't want to progress. I don't want to pursue any more responsibility. And that's fine. But let's just keep in mind that salary ranges usually are tied up to a title. And again, especially true, it's definitely true if you're in a bigger company. And at some point, you want the final raise that will put you at the next level. And it will be hard to get that raise unless you are already at that role band. So that's a limiting factor as far as salary goes. And also another very significant factor is that in some places, you only get significant peer feedback if you are up for a promotion. And obviously feedback is a crucial, essential part of career growth and personal growth. Now, you can say, well, it's okay. I'm fine with the level of salary I have. I don't want to pursue more responsibilities to also get more compensation. Now, that's fine. But consider that besides promotions and besides salary increases, you also have to think about skill obsolescence, career stagnation, and career mobility, employability, career satisfaction by the way of having choices. Now, if you are here watching this talk, I'm sure that at least one of those things apply to you. Because what happens when your work has business value, but no prospects of giving you room to grow, right? To get more responsibilities. Or what if your work is mainly busy work, you're helping building incremental features, improvements, but there's no chance for you to tackle some high complexity project that brings even greater business value? Or what if you want to move out of the role you're at, and how do you avoid ending up in the same type of role? Here's where you're probably thinking, who am I to be talking about these things? I am an engineer. I'm a senior engineer at VMware. VMware sponsors this open source project named Valero, which is an application that runs on Kubernetes. I do have some associations that I have acquired through doing some extra work in the open source community. I am a Kubernetes maintainer, contributor. I am a CNCF ambassador. I do a podcast that talks about cloud native technologies. And that's my contact information. If you have any question about this topic that you think about later, definitely contact me. I would love to help anyone jump in the open source world. Now let's take a pause and think, open source is definitely not for everybody, just like anything in life, right? Because probably the same reasons why it is so good for some people. For some people, being out there and having the kind of high level interaction with other people and high level engagement with other people can be very stressful or just not desirable. It's you're always wearing multiple hats. Some people are very good at that, but some people want to avoid that sort of role. And wins and fails happen in public, definitely. The community kindness varies per project. Now, what is the extra value of pursuing open source work for you? It can be a great venue to be of service, especially if you find a project that resonates with values that you have. You can choose what to work on depending on your skill level or ability to get someone to mentor you through things. Your resume makes no difference on what you knew before. You can work on a small project, or you can jump in a super large scale project, and each has different advantages, different ways of different processes, different ways of approaching things, and you can learn completely different things depending on what kind of project you're working with. Some large projects also have formal mentoring or shadow programs. It's definitely something to look into. Pull requests accepted. No resumes needed. You don't need a degree. You don't need anything. All you need to do to participate is to make an actual contribution. All the work you do is visible. So you actually building a resume very publicly. The extra value of open source work in regards to employment, or for anyone who is considering working with you or alongside you, might be potential employer, might be your current employer who's considering giving you a role with more responsibilities. It might be a business partner, it might be anything. It sends a strong signal for where you want to be. Sometimes you tell people, but they want to see you actually doing what you were talking about. It makes you more of a known entity, and this means in the minds of people who are, let's say, interviewing candidates, if you are pursuing employment or a promotion where you are, the number one thing that we want to know, and for people who interview often, you probably can relate, is who is this person? What's their ability to do the work that's required, and how do they work? So when all of that is public, your interaction with people, your actual work, when all of that is public, you become much more of a known entity, and it's much easier to right off the bat know how you would fit in whatever role people are considering you for. You might collect enough skills and even personal references to help you move to a different role. Companies hiring for open source projects will be much more inclined, all things being equal, to hire someone who has made contributions to open source projects. And if you've made contributions to their open source projects, that is even stronger of a signal. And I've seen people being very impressed with the smallest contributions to their project, because it shows interest. It shows that you read through things, you put a little bit of effort. So it really pays off. Now, how do people get started in open source? There's no specific right answer. I could come up with a list 10 times as long as this, but keeping you to these things that I thought were more relevant. Definitely understands that each community is different. So you're going to find different personalities, different pace of work. Each project is going to be completely different from another. So if you absolutely love one, doesn't mean you're going to love the other, and vice versa. Look for projects that reflect the values that you have or are exciting to you in any way. It's just going to be easier to stick to it. Find what the preferred channels of communications are for that project, and sort of tap in, take a look at what they're talking about and how they talk about things. Attend open meetings. You'll give you a sense of what's important to them in the moment, what problems they're trying to tackle, what their priorities are, what's coming down the line. Read the documentation. You can learn a ton from reading, and a lot of times projects have documentation for how to get started, so that's very helpful. Start small. Any contribution is valuable for a lot of projects, but also read point number one, not for every project. Some projects are not very welcoming of tiny contributions. You just have to check around, and maybe you just ask. For my projects, we accept any small contribution is great. And for a lot of small projects, that is true. Ask for help. A lot of welcoming communities are very glad to help newcomers. Just do it, ship it. Perfection is the enemy of done. And you get so much from just getting something pushed out. Repeat. And each time you go through the cycle, you get better. Each time you go through the cycle, you get to interact with more people. And you will just keep increasing in skills, in confidence, and pretty soon you are the one teaching people. Give yourself time. Building a different set of skills doesn't happen overnight with anything. And always be bragging, teaching about the things you learned. It helps you and it helps others. So you can write about what you learned. You can write about the process you used to actually effect a contribution. And you can write about what you learned from it. And that is also a very good way for you to internalize what you learned with that project. In conclusion, I just want to acknowledge that working with non-paid open source requires time and resources that not everybody has. And if that is you, it's completely okay. You are in good company. So many people don't have that opportunity. And that's why any respectful company is not going to require that to give you a promotion or to give you another role or to hire you. And just wanted to say, though, that investing in our career sometimes takes that extra time, and sometimes it takes that extra resource. And I am advocating for you to consider, if you put that time and resource into working with an open source project, you might pay off in a very direct, concrete way that is going to give you a very strong feedback loop, is going to help you develop connections with people who are outside of your current network. And that is a great thing to have. And you can get all of that just by contributing to maybe just one open source project. With that, I think we have plenty of time for questions. I think I went a little bit too fast.
That's okay. You have several questions, so I'm happy to ask them.
Good. And I just want to point out that my email is on the screen right now, and definitely email me if you want any tip or have questions later. I'll be glad to help.
That's so nice. So one of the questions was, how can I contribute to open source from a non-technical background? This is an ex-product management person.
Yes. So there are different ways. You definitely don't have to be a programmer. On the description of the talk, I added actually a bottom note saying open source requires all hands on board, not just programmers. And a lot of good open source projects actually have product management. I have a product management on my product, and it's sort of like, get to know who that person is, get to know, like, hey, can you hand off something? That's one way. Another way is read through the documentation. Can you make it a little better? Just transforming what is there into something better. Now, documentation, some people tend to suggest people start with the documentation, but documentation is actually not easy because it requires you to understand what the project does. So it is not trivial, it's definitely not easy, but if you can at least transform it into something better, that is a way to start that doesn't require programming. Now, it's technology, so there is going to be, at the very, very least, you're probably going to have to know Git. So there's going to be some technical learning that you're probably going to have to do. But the good news is, once you learn once, then you have it forever. And some things that we use with open source is every project uses. So it's definitely a skill that can be transferable.
So another question is, how can I get started with open source? So if there's something that you need to know, like Git, what's the best place to go to learn those things? I
don't have off the top of my head. And also for something like Git or any technology, you have to think, do I learn better with videos? Do I learn better with reading blog posts? Should I just drop $50 and take an online course? So I'm not like looking for things all over the place. Sometimes I do that. Like, I don't have time to read 10 blog posts and maybe just one was useful. Let me just pay for this course and it's $35. I can, it's just an investment. Or maybe your company can pay for a course. Now, the question itself is a very broad question. So I don't know if they're talking about the actual technology. I think start with Googling and asking people. Maybe if you're lucky to know someone who does work open source, ask them and try to start with more specific questions.
Okay. Here's an interesting question. How do you interact with a more hostile open source community?
You don't?
I was like, why would we want to interact with a hostile open source community? But
remove yourself from that situation if you can. Now, if you can't, so let's say maybe you have to do it for work, or maybe you really want to collaborate and you're just running into this one case. What I do personally if I try to ignore it and just get past it. I am learning not to take things personally. It takes time to actually internalize that. Don't take it personally. When somebody hostile to you, it's 100% about them and 0% about you, okay? So just keep that in mind. Now, if you can't do those two things, ignore and not take it personally, then ask someone for advice. That's what I do. It's like I have this, I turn to anyone and I just ask, I have this situation. How would you handle it?
Interesting. You got more questions keep coming in. Do you have any favorite open source projects?
I really love the project I work on. I've been working on it for 3 years. I like that we are very friendly and our community is very engaged and everybody's very welcoming. And it's not huge and it's not tiny either. Now, another project that I really like, and I like it because I find it so amazing that it's even that all these things exist. The Kubernetes project is a huge enterprise that is open source. And it's amazing that you have that opportunity to work with something like that, because you know, you might have to go and work for Oracle or Google to work on that kind of scale. And with Kubernetes, it's just there. It's not the only one, but it's a friendly community, it's huge, it's very popular. So I would say that Kubernetes is probably my favorite.
Here's one. How do you find an intersection of an open source project you find internally motivated and your existing skill set? So I guess the question is, what is the best way to find things that you find motivating and matches with your skill set?
Sometimes you just have to experiment. I mean, when I want to find something specific, like, oh, I have this criteria, or I want to find something I like, and there also is a match for a certain set of criteria, I start with Google and I start with asking people. And once you start narrowing things down, then, oh, I want to read a review. I want to see how, like I gave some tips on my slides, see how they work together, see what they're working on. And then sometimes you just get to a point that you have to jump in and experiment.
Okay. What are best practices for open source?
Yes, so I actually saw that question and I was thinking about it. That's a very hard question to answer, because I don't know best practice for code, best practice for writing documentation, best practices for engaging with the community. I did mention open source is wearing multiple hats, and some people are very versatile and very good at that. So open source is great. But to answer that question, I would need to know which area, because there's so many areas that whatever specific role you take, even if you're a developer, you do a little bit of everything else too. So yeah, just it depends. If it's an existing project, usually the project, if it's a mature project, will already have guidelines set for best practices for that project. And if the project doesn't, that's something that to observe, and with time, it takes time for you to observe like what the project wants to be. And then maybe you can jump in and make a suggestion or a proposal for best practices in the specific area that you are noticing that needs improvements.
Okay. And I think we have time for one more question. How can I get started with open source?
Yes. So first of all, you have to feel a call for that kind of work, and then find out what do you value, and is there an open source project that is worthwhile investing your time in. And then exploring, like I said, start with observing, maybe start with talking, introduce yourself to the community somehow, and then try it out, just experiment. I really highly encourage people to experiment, and maybe just like jump in and experiment and then figure it out.
Okay, sounds great. Well, those are all our questions. Thank you so much. I'm going to give everybody back a whole minute of their afternoon. And thank you, Carlisia. This was terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. Oh, and everyone, please remember to rate the session. It's right at the sort of top of your screen. It says rate. And if you give us your email address when you do a rating, that enters each rating you do gets you a chance for some drawings that we're going to be doing tomorrow. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Thanks, Carlisia. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Okay, so it's over.